2 in the 2020 draft. And we're halfway through the NFL season and the Lions have only 3 wins. Find out what ESPN's best case scenario is for the Honolulu Blue and Silver and whether Dennis and Brian agree. Join the conversation by commenting live on YouTube, Facebook Live, and Twitch. This is the Fifth Chapter with Dennis Fithian and Brian Chapman.
He represents the mitten by way of Penn State. When Chapman gets to talking sports, the people can't wait. He represents the mitten. Be a true EMU, but cut Dennis in the fall and his veins bleeding blue. They got respect around the state. When that light turns red, so don't sleep on these stews. Just invite your friends to cut your nap short and tip your cap for and sit back for the Fifth Chapter. Brian Chapman. Dennis Fithian. When they open their mouths, they spit in the facts, bro. This ain't even optional, man. You just have to tune into YouTube to watch the broadcast or download it to your phone to peep the podcast. They mix laughter, they get after. It's all captured in the Fifth Chapter.
That's right. Welcome to the Fifth Chapter. I am Brian Chapman. He is Dennis Fithian. We are ready and raring to go with 5 more fantastic chapters, and we're excited for a full slate of SEC football on Saturday. Isn't that right?
No, I'm looking forward to that Wolverine Badger game. It's the game of the weekend. College football. Herb Street and Fowler will be at the Big House, and then not to be outdone, Sunday afternoon, the Washington football team hosting the Lions. Man, 2 quality football games that I'm looking forward to both of them.
Yeah, and for those of you that didn't get my joke, there's absolutely nothing close to a full slate of SEC football this Saturday because there are 7 scheduled games. 4 have been postponed or canceled due to the coronavirus pandemic, meaning most of the games have been wiped out. Plus, we look at the Big Ten's SEC team, the Deep South Buckeyes. Their game against Maryland has been canceled because of an outbreak at Maryland.
It can happen any day. They can shut everything down. We've been saying that for weeks, if not for months. So, yep.
Chicago is going into a stay-at-home order today.
Yeah, I saw the recommendation from Big Gretsch to not celebrate Thanksgiving with the extended family. So.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people that are going to do that, and a lot of people that are going to give Big Gretsch a big finger, and it might be bony finger, but it'll be right there in the middle saying, I'm doing what I want. And we just have to hope that all those that are doing so aren't secretly having a big super spreader event amongst the family members. But definitely want to thank everybody out there who is watching episode 54 via YouTube, Facebook Live, and or Twitch. And also those who are listening to the podcast via Apple, Google, and Spotify. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and participate in each show by sending in your comments via Facebook Live and YouTube. Dennis will be reading those throughout the course of the show. Let's take a look, though, at today's book. In the second chapter, Russell Westbrook is demanding a trade. What would be a likely destination for him? And we've got a trade rumor surrounding the Pistons. Could the Pistons trade up to number 2? Also in the third chapter, ESPN says the Lions' best case scenario is to finish with an 8-8 record. We'll tell you whether or not we agree with that and what we think the best case scenario for the Lions would be. In the fourth chapter, there's a report that the Tigers could be going after a starting pitcher during the free agency period. Taijuan Walker, would that be a good move for A.J. Hinch and company? And then in the fifth chapter, it is the major wager. But Dennis, let's start off with the first chapter. And that takes us to college basketball. College basketball is supposed to start, I believe, in 13 days. But with Rona spreading around, who knows if it will actually happen. And if it does start, who knows if we'll get through more than 2 or 3 weeks. But when you think of Big Ten basketball around the country, you start with the Michigan State Spartans and Tom Izzo because they've won 3 consecutive regular season titles. Izzo is a national champion. He's been to multiple Final Fours. And earlier this year, he got the commitment of the top high school basketball player in the country, Imani Bates from Ypsilanti. Now, that's for the class of 2022, but he could reclassify for the class of 2021 because of Imani Bates and 4-star center Enoch Boakye of Canada. The Spartans have the number 1 recruiting class in 2022. But with players signing their letters of intent this week, who has the top class of 2021? Let's take a look. We know that it's not Michigan State because they have the number 9 class in 2021. Let's keep on scrolling up. Number 8, Baylor. Number 7, Oregon. You got to wonder, well, where the heck would Villanova, a recent national champion, be? They're at number 6. So they're not at number 1. What about Penny Hardaway and the Memphis Tigers? Not them. They're at number 5. Coach K's Duke Blue Devils, they are at number 4, as you can see. What about Kentucky? John Calipari also always has lots of 5-star recruits. They're at number 3. Who the heck is number 1 if it's not Kentucky or Duke? North Carolina? No, number 2 is Florida State. Who the heck could number 1 be? Michigan. Dennis Fithian's Michigan Wolverines with 6 recruits. 1 of them a 5-star, 4 4-stars, and a 3-star. They've got the number 1 recruiting class in the country coming in to next year's recruiting class. And if you look at what they have coming in, who they have coming in particular, they've got 5-star Caleb Houston, who just committed a couple of weeks ago. They've got 4 stars in Isaiah Barnes, Kobe Buffkin, and Frankie Collins, who just committed a couple of months ago. Musa Diabate, who just committed 3 days ago, and they've got 3-star Will Cheddar. Okay, well that makes sense. He's right next
just
to
like
the cheese state. But
That's right.
That's a heck of a recruiting class, Dennis, for your Michigan Wolverines. So, Dennis, I got to ask you and our viewers out there, with Juwan Howard bringing in the top class in the country next year, but with Izzo having the best class the year after and possibly the best player in the country either next year or the year after, who would you rather be over the next 3 years, Michigan or Michigan State?
Well, it's a tough one. You know, you always pick Michigan when it comes down to that. Almost, just because you're a Michigan fan, you're going to pick Michigan. But you know what? You look at this year, Michigan State, along with Wisconsin and Iowa and Illinois, they're really the top tier in the Big Ten, and they could win the Big Ten. They could go to the Final Four. I think those 4 teams, and then Michigan's in that next group. They could be as high as number 5. So I look at it like going into this year, if you were taking your allegiances out of the equation, and you would say, well, whose roster would you want? Whose ultimate end game would you want this year? That would be State. And then you mentioned the recruiting class of next year. And the one thing you're going to take the best player, and it's not just like the best player. This is supposed to be a generational player, a Magic Johnson, a Chris Webber type, and Amani Bates. If he ends up going to Michigan State, he might not. They might go to the draft, but since the pandemic, it looks like that they're not going to we don't know yet, but it looks like he's going to end up at MSU. So, you're going to take the generational talent, and you're going to take the team that has the better shot this year. So you would pick Michigan State, but that you could even talk about Juwan Howard, who came in here. You didn't really know how he was going to be able to do, but you look at this year's class that he's got, the freshmen that are going to hit the floor in a couple weeks. They were the best in the Big Ten coming in this year that Juwan Howard was able to produce. And about, I don't know when it was, a couple months ago, it looked like he had 2 5-stars that he was going to reel in. And one of them decided he was going to Europe or the G League, and the other one went to Arizona State. It was like, man, this sucks. Juwan Howard just struck out on 2 5-stars. But being able to pull the 2 in, whether you want to call Diabate a 4 or 5-star, 24/7 ranks him as a 5-star, 20th overall player, whatever. He's an awesome prospect, and it's a great haul there. But yeah, I mean, you'd pick State, but having Michigan even in the conversation, says a heck of a lot about Juwan Howard, how he's doing.
Oh, it does. I think it's a tough question too, and I would rather be the Spartans, not just this year, but over the next few years, because like you said, Amani Bates isn't just the best player among these next couple of recruiting classes on these 2 teams. He's probably, according to the experts, at least this past year, as a sophomore, he was the best high school basketball player in the country. So if you're an incoming freshman to college, if you're an incoming senior to high school, all those players are worse than Amani Bates was last year. If he was a freshman in college right now, he'd be the number one player in the country. That's what they're saying. He's supposed to be better than the unibrow, better than Zion, better than John Morant and LaMelo Ball and Kyrie Irving and all these other guys that could been or have been number one or in conversation for the number one pick in the draft. And on top of that, when you look at Michigan State getting the best player, this isn't like when Markelle Fultz was at Washington and he was the best player in the country, arguably, with a bunch of scrubs. Or Anthony Edwards being the best player on Georgia with a bunch of scrubs and finishing near the bottom of the SEC. He's the best player on a Michigan, or he's going to be the best player on a Michigan State team that has a top 10 recruiting class coming in this year and has a bunch of talent around him. So you talk about back-to-back top 10 recruiting classes and the best high school player in a long time. Plus, they've got a proven coach, not a guy who's opening some eyes like Juwan Howard is with this recruiting class, but a guy who's proven in Tom Izzo, who's gone to tons of Big Ten championships, or won tons of Big Ten championships, gone to tons of Final Fours, and isn't coming off of a 500 Big Ten season. Yeah, I would go with Michigan State too, but if you're a Michigan fan, you've got to be excited because now you're in the hunt, and Michigan State fans have to they're obviously not going to sit back and say, oh crap, all we got is Amani Bates, but it's not going to be handed to the conference isn't going to be handed to them on a silver platter over the next couple of years because of the team down the road.
Well, it all looks good for Tom Izzo, but maybe he goes back and reverts to some of those stupid things that he was doing just a couple of years ago, like when he was down to Giddy Potts at Middle Tennessee State 15-2 and refused to call a timeout. That was one of the most ridiculous and had the worst loss in college basketball history until Virginia the next year lost as a 1 seed. State owned that one. And then I think in that particular year that Virginia lost as a 1 seed, Jaren Jackson, who's, ended up being a lottery pick. Tom Izzo's not even putting him in a game. He's putting some walk-on. So maybe
at LCA against Syracuse.
Couple bad years there for Tom Izzo in the coaching decision category, but he bounced back from that, and you know what? Maybe Amani Bates is just so good it doesn't matter. But thought of that's tongue in cheek. It seems like a can't miss guy here for Bates if he ends up actually heading to college.
Well, and that's a big question if he heads to college, because one thing I think you have to consider with the coronavirus pandemic, with the Big Ten being so quick to pull the trigger, it seems like, compared to other conferences, and with college more likely to not play, is would Amani Bates consider skipping college and doing what LaMelo Ball did or what Brandon Jennings did, and that's go overseas to play for some money? I think when he committed to Michigan State earlier this year, he said that he was committed to Michigan State, but it was like for the time being or something like that. He said he had some sort of qualifier, if I remember, when he committed. So that was obviously not assuming that there was going to be a worldwide pandemic. But what if he decides he wants to go play in China or Australia or some other place where the pandemic is under better control and he doesn't have to worry about not playing in front of fans and things like that?
Well, the other part is maybe that by the time he's ready to come in, we'll see if he reclassifies or not, but maybe college basketball players are going to be able to, and all college athletes are going to be able to start making money off their name. And if that's the case, a guy can make a couple million just going to Michigan State. I would think that would be a pretty big factor if for whatever reason, the courts block that. The NCAA doesn't want these guys profiting off of anything. Maybe guys like Bates and some of these other 5 stars be like, I'll just go to the G League, or like you're saying, go overseas. They can get 6 figures, 7 figures if they want to go and play overseas. So, I think it would come down to that decision if they're going to be able to profit off their name. My guess in that situation, that scenario, that Bates would try out Michigan State and then reclassify so he can get in there earlier, make some money, and he'd still be on track maybe to be the number 1 pick. What would be 2022 or 2023 then at that point?
Yeah, I think that if you're a college basketball fan in Michigan, we both know that Michigan is not a good college basketball state. It's not Kentucky or North Carolina or Kansas or Indiana. Michigan State has had plenty of good teams, but the buzz just isn't there. Michigan in the last, 6-7 years has been to the NCAA championship game the last twice, and you still don't have fans talking about them until you get to late February, and then 2 days after the Final Four ends, nobody's talking about Michigan basketball. That's just not the way it is. But imagine if we're sitting here 15 months from now, and based on Imani Bates reclassifying to 2021 and Michigan having this top recruiting class in the country, we're sitting here getting ready for a January 22nd basketball game at the Breslin Center between number 1 undefeated Michigan State and number 2 undefeated Michigan. And then we have that classic game to watch. And then they meet again in Ann Arbor. And then both of these teams head into the NCAA tournament as 1 seeds with 2 or fewer losses. That would be something we've never seen before in the state of Michigan. That would get even the college basketball fans that like to say, I'll just wait to fill out my bracket to start paying attention. They'd be paying attention from, at the latest, Thanksgiving.
Yeah, you would hope so. You know what? It's crazy, that it doesn't seem like it's bigger talking about, college sports really in general. But, football is just such a monster, and pro football, it's like, this is Southeast Michigan, man, it's Lions territory. I mean, that's what the majority of people are just obsessed with. And, that's what they get served up on a daily basis. And, if you have a pro team, everybody likes a winner though. So you have any of the other sports that are having success, well, that's going to be popular for that time. That's people like pro sports that way. But, college hoops, man, if it's provincial, you like the Spartans, you like the Wolverines, but it just doesn't take to the general population. You're right about that. But you know what? John Beilein said it a couple of years ago. Why not, man? You could have 1 versus 2 fighting it out. You could have teams. I don't know. I don't think it'll ever get to be like a little tobacco road up here or something where people are just so into it. It's just one of those things, man. Those winter sports. It's just like hockey, man. You can find people like hockey's the greatest sport in the world. Love it. Love the Red Wings. Love all hockey. But just as a general rule, you're just not going to get people, the masses, fired up about hockey and hoops.
Well, I think that perhaps one thing that Michigan and Michigan State have lacked that college basketball fans in Michigan can get elsewhere is a guy who's going to be one of the top 2 or 3 picks in the draft. Now, obviously, 2 years ago it was, you had Jaren Jackson go number 3 overall, but he wasn't a guy that college basketball fans across the country were tuning in to watch like they were with R.J. Barrett and company at Duke a couple years ago, and Zion Williamson. They weren't tuning in to watch Ja Morant. If we have a situation where you got Chad Ford or all these other mock draft experts saying Imani Bates is going number 1 and Caleb Houston is going number 2, and they're on top of SportsCenter with highlights on a nightly basis, I think that could be a big draw. When you look at what Michigan has had under John Beilein, they've had, a bunch of solid players that get drafted in the 2nd round and late in the 1st round that play with good team chemistry. And you look at what Tom Izzo has generally had. He's had point guards like Cassius Winston that can go late in the 1st round with not great athleticism. You got Denzel Valentine, who was the last pick in the lottery, but hardly anybody that draws the entire attention of the nation. And that's what we could legitimately have with these recruiting classes of Michigan and Michigan State for the first time.
Well, they get so hurt talking about college basketball as a rule because as soon as these guys get on campus and they're any good, they're gone to the NBA draft. So it's hard to get that buzz from year to year, except with Zion. Like the first game, he was just and he was a YouTube sensation, but then he went out and immediately was just something that everybody had to watch. And you don't get many guys like that, but Bates seems to be like he could be. I mean, we're talking about him already. He's going to be a number 1 pick. He can make millions off of his name.
Isn't his game against LeBron James Jr. going to be on national TV later this week or tonight or something like that?
I think it's on coming up.
Oh, okay.
It's on right now, I think. I think it's on right.
Yeah.
I think it's on right now.
Yeah, so Michigan and Michigan State don't get players like that. I mean, those players, the last time something like that happened was when LeBron James was around, and that was 17 years ago. So this is, I think this could draw a lot of attention. Do we have some feedback?
We do. DJ Major, he's not talking about LeMahieu. He's saying, don't sleep on Leonard Hamilton. FSU is a yearly top 8 tournament seed. Yeah, well, you mentioned that the Seminoles had the number 2 class, right?
That is correct.
Yeah, who knew? DJ likes the Yankees and Florida State, huh? We've got Keith who's like, "What's up, fellas?" And I really don't think it matters trying to decide which recruiting class is going to be the best. I'm glad both schools got great players. I'm a U of M fan, and I remember U of M getting the number 1 recruit in the country in Gerard Ward. He was a bum, and obviously you just never know how it will translate. The next Antoine Jobert, you can't guard me, fat boy. That's what I think Skiles said to him. Well, the one thing about Gerard Ward, he hurt his knee. So, you don't know. He was just an all-right player, but he was the number 1 player. So I get what you're saying there. It's like when State, I think they had a number 1 guy in Kelvin Torbert on the Flint, man, and he was just like, everybody talked about him in high school, like, man, this guy's going to be the greatest. And he was just, I'd say, an average, college basketball player. So we have seen that. No, you are right. But, these guys that they're talking about, these guys, a lot of times the 5 stars do pan out when you're talking about college hoops. Keith's got one more that says, Chap is so young, he doesn't even know how good both schools were in the mid-'80s and '90s. Tarpley, Rice, Vincent, Skiles, both teams were loaded throughout. Yeah, Chap.
Well, I'll say this. As a 36-year-old, my sister would beg to differ that I'm so young, but I am, I'll say, too young to remember the mid-'80s because I was born in the mid-'80s.
Yeah, but the point there is right, man. Back then, State and Michigan, Michigan, they just had that 10-year Ed Martin, like, de facto probation where they were just wiped off the map and college basketball wasn't there. And plus, most Michigan fans that say, we're a football school, we can't be a basketball school. But, from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, all the way through, Michigan's, been to the Final Four in each one of those decades. And they've had some awesome teams. And, finally, they when they switched from the Chrysler Arena to the Chrysler Center and updated that thing like it's a brand new arena here, and what John Beilein was able to do, and now what looks like Juwan Howard, which has been,
it's surprising. Yeah, because
surprising.
he came in.
He was going to come in.
Yeah, there was all this talk about, well, he's a former Fab Five member, and all these high school players are going to want to play for him. And I'm thinking, they weren't alive during the Fab Five. There's no guarantee that he's going to be able to recruit these guys, and we'll see. I was not buying at all that he was going to have top 5 recruiting classes until perhaps he started winning and proving himself as a coach. And this past year, he didn't necessarily prove himself as matter of fact, he did not prove himself as a star coach with a 500 Big Ten record, worse than Penn State. But he was able to go on that recruiting.
He had a good first year, though. Like at one point, what they were able to do down in the Bahamas, you could see.
Yeah. Well, that was when they peaked.
Well, they peaked, but they were also going to get into the NCAA tournament. So that was really the big part that mattered there is if they were going to get into the tourney, and they were.
Yeah, they were going to get in. I was just surprised. I mean, it just shows you how great of a recruiter he was able to be, because despite not having a phenomenal year and despite having a limited track record with 0 NCAA appearances, he's got the number 1 recruiting class in the country. That's stunning, and that's a great thing for Michigan.
It is. You know what? One of his sons was a teammate of one of the guys. He was able to get it in there, and the other one looked and saw that he was in the NBA for 20 years and liked that connection there. So you never know what kids are going to go for, but getting off to a good start is pretty paramount there for Howard, especially after he struck out on those 2 5-stars. I mean, you thought that was going to be his thing. He was going to be like, hey, man, I played with LeBron James. I was over there, coaching LeBron James and, all of these kind of things. I know I was in the league for 20 years and as a player and a coach here, you thought he would be able to roll that out there. And if the kids didn't know, their parents knew who the Fab Five were. But, after he struck out in 24 hours on those 2 5-stars, to be able to come back and be able to put this class together, especially with what Izzo's doing. It's just great for the state, great for college basketball, great for the Big Ten.
Absolutely. And if one of those guys wants to decommit, Penn State can always use some talent.
I like that Penn State team from last year. It's too bad you didn't get a chance to see what they were going to be able to do in the tournament.
They never go to the tournament, and Rona had to strike this year.
Yeah, they're really really athletic team. I liked them, and now your coach is on the outs because of something shady or whatever. I don't know what's going on there.
Racism or something. Yeah.
Yeah, something. I didn't get the whole story on that, so it can go down the tubes quickly.
Yeah. Penn State basketball windows are very limited. All right, let's turn the page to the second chapter.
We're staying with round ball, and this gets us the NBA draft is coming up on Wednesday. We've got some news on that. Meanwhile, Russell Westbrook, one of the big names in all of the NBA, is demanding a trade, and there's been a few people saying, hey, what about the Pistons? Chap, What about the Pistons?
Well, I want to share an article that I found on CBSSports.com with some people out there that has some of the details about what the Russell Westbrook contract looks like and in terms of how likely to be for him to be traded. I'll put it up on the screen once again from CBS Sports. Westbrook is currently owed $132.6 million over the next 3 seasons. In terms of raw dollars owed, that would make him the second most expensive player ever traded, narrowly trailing Blake Griffin, who was owed just north of $153 million. But the $44.2 million average would be the most expensive per year contract ever dealt. So that's one issue. Additionally, in a report from The Athletic, it says that Westbrook reportedly wants to return to his role in Oklahoma City as a floor general. Now, that doesn't mean he wants to go back to Oklahoma City, but obviously in OKC, he was a floor general. He has to share that role with James Harden right now. Additionally, there are a lot of other ball handlers out there on the market on the trade block right now, like Chris Paul, who might be going to the Suns, Drew Holiday, DeMar DeRozan, maybe Victor Oladipo. And the article says that perhaps Kyle Lowry and Mike Conley are available. Fred VanVleet, who's been connected to the Pistons, is a free agent. So all those factors make it complicated. And then later on in the article, they listed the top 5 options for Russell Westbrook and did not mention the Pistons. They said number 1, Clippers, followed by Knicks, Magic, Wizards, and Spurs. The Pistons should not be an option here. I think that obviously if it's a big name, you want to think about it. And when you think about Troy Weaver coming from the Thunder and going to the Pistons, where Westbrook was just a year ago, that makes you think, well, hey, maybe he'd want to bring him back to his new organization. But that it doesn't make sense because they would have 2 monster contracts. You look at how the Pistons are trying to rebuild, and Westbrook he actually turns 32 years old today. Today's his birthday. So
happy birthday,
That's
Ross.
right. Happy birthday. I don't think as a birthday present you want to come to the Pistons. And he's a guy who relies so much on his athleticism. He can't shoot threes. I think last year he shot 26%. So he's a bricklayer from three-point land. His athleticism is going to decline. He's not the same player that he was when he was averaging a triple-double. And I don't think that just becoming a floor general for the Pistons is going to make him back into an MVP candidate, though he'll still be an all-star. For the Pistons, it doesn't make any sense. Plus, you'd have to give up that first-round pick and potentially even more to get Russell Westbrook. I would not even consider taking Westbrook.
Well, it's a terrible fit unless you want it to be a terrible fit and are just thinking about tanking. And Troy Weaver might have that reality. I know we talked about this last time out, but you know what? I saw your boy, Rod Beard, you retweeted it today. He was throwing in there something with Tony Snell and how they could fit it in with the amount of money, because I think they have $30 million or so under the cap, how they could work it. So I guess they don't even have to do dollar for dollar for it. But, Snell for Westbrook, if they're just looking to get out from under the deal, there would be a scenario where you could say, hey, trade him for Blake, and, that would, of course, work as well because those gigantic contracts. And then the thing is, Westbrook has an additional year, and you'd say, well, why the hell would you do that? Well, you would do that if you were the Pistons. You would take on this monstrous contract, and in return, you're going to get a future number 1, hopefully unprotected, with your eyes maybe on that double draft. And then you're bringing in Russell Westbrook with the idea that, hey, you know what? He's going to be a ball hog, and he's not going to be able to shoot threes, and he's over the hill, and this is going to be a terrible team. And
but there's only so terrible they can be when they have a player like Russell Westbrook. If they have Westbrook and he stays healthy, what's their floor? In the Eastern Conference, their floor might be the 8 seed or the 7 seed. Their ceiling isn't going to be higher than like the 5 seed. But I mean, with Westbrook on the squad, who can go out there and get you 30 points a night, they're not going to be sitting there around the 13 seed, 12 seed. It's just not going to happen.
Well, I disagree with that. Plus, he's a moody guy and disgruntled here, like coming in.
He'd want out.
Well, he would want out. And so what you're bringing in is a combustible player that you're thinking, hey, the thing, if you're a Piston fan right here and you're holding on to Blake Griffin, you're thinking I'm sure there's a lot of people, part of you are like, hey, if he gets hurt, just pull the shoot and, try to be one of the worst teams like happened last year. You know what? Troy Weaver coming up and thinking that this team, I don't think there's moves available for Troy Weaver to get the Pistons past a ceiling of a 7 seed this year. And with that reality, I mean, that's the way I feel. And with that reality, he should be relaying this to Tom Gores and saying, look, even if we come up with magic moves everywhere, even if we hit on our draft pick, we're not going to be better than the 7 seed in the East. Let's not even – so that's dreaming of going anything higher. And if I hear anybody say and start talking about, like, there's certainly – you might disagree with that, but there's no way they're getting, like, home court advantage. There's no way they're one of the top 4 teams.
No, they're not getting home court.
If Troy Weaver was coming to me, if he was at some news conference and talked about that, then you know what kind of GM he is. He's just coming in and, he's just telling things to, for Gores, that Gores wants to hear. Yeah, it's hard. And I hate doing this because I've been rooting against now for the Red Wings for 4 or 5 years. The Tigers have sucked for 6 years. The Lions always suck, and the Pistons pretty much have as well. For 1 year when they played the Cavs, it was exciting for a minute. They got swept in all those games, and Reggie Jackson wanted to be a ball, the hero in all of those games. That was the interesting part for the Pistons. Other than that, there's been nothing. It's a really hard look to say we're going to be bad for 3 years and we're going to tank, especially when it's been tank town, for everybody.
You can't tank with Westbrook. It's impossible. He's too good of a player. If he's healthy,
I disagree.
You can't tank.
He's not that good of a player.
You don't think that a guy that when he leaves Houston and can take control of a team in the Eastern Conference, like how many teams are certainly going to be better than the Pistons next year in the Eastern Conference? Obviously, you got Milwaukee, you got Toronto, you got Miami, you got Boston. That's 4. Indiana would be better than them at 5. Is Brooklyn going to be guaranteed to be better than the Pistons? I don't trust. Yes. I don't trust Kevin Durant. And it depends on who else they put around Westbrook. If Christian Wood comes back, and if they keep their draft pick and they end up with a decent shooting guard to go along with Westbrook, I mean, I think they could certainly be the 6 or the 7 seed in the Eastern Conference with Westbrook.
Maybe a 7.
Okay, so if you want them to be bad, how is a 7 seed going to be bad? And what's the floor for them? They can't be a 15 or a 4.
You know what? I think the floor for a guy that
in the East
is going to dominate the ball. Yeah, I mean, look at all these teams. So, they've got a little bit of something.
They're not worse than Cleveland. They're not worse than the Knicks, the Bulls.
Well, they could be as bad as those teams. They could be.
With Westbrook?
Yeah, dude, I don't know what Westbrook you've been watching, man. He can't shoot. He's slowing down.
He is slowing down, but he's look, he's slowing down. He's not what he was, but he's also not a scrub. He would be the best player the Pistons have had, and I don't know how long.
I don't think he's as good as Blake.
When healthy? I mean, Blake Griffin's knees are destroyed, so I don't think that there's a lot of talk about him being his knees being better. And in the second, I'll play you a trade scenario involving Blake Griffin. But if both of these guys are healthy, I would rather have the giant contract and the talent of Russell Westbrook over Blake Griffin.
Yeah, I would rather have the gigantic contract with picks attached to it. I think that the Pistons could be in a better position.
So Houston would be sending picks to the Pistons?
Yeah, to take the contract, right. That's right.
So then the only reason for Houston to make the deal is because they want to make Russell Westbrook happy. That wouldn't make sense to me.
They want to get rid of the contract. That's what they want to do. That's what I think. And you know what? If you're a Piston fan and you're like excited about the upcoming season, then you're listening to me and you're saying, I don't know, it's the stupidest thing ever. But like if you're buying into a 3-year pull to shoot, I mean,
well, here's
that's
the other
what
thing.
I'm looking at.
In the NBA in 2020 and for the last several years, when you demand a trade in this players' league, if you're a star player, you also get a heck of a lot of say in where you want to go. And Russell Westbrook is not going to say, here's my list of 4 teams, and Detroit is one of those 4 teams.
That's a good point. Very good point.
Now, the Clippers...
I don't think it's happening to begin with.
Yes.
So you're right about that. I don't think that the Troy Weaver is going to come in and
he's going to trade for a guy who wants no part of Detroit. I don't think so.
You know, the Troy Hinkie Weaver. I don't think he's coming in the pull of 76ers. That's what I suggest that the Pistons do, though. And I know people hate that. And I know this town, you know, it's been like everybody's been doing a Sam Hinkie here for years. So it sucks, but I think
Clippers.
That's the best path.
Clippers. That's where I think he should probably go. The Clippers, because based on the contracts that they have, they could keep Paul George and keep Kawhi Leonard and bring him there. Westbrook would love to go to L.A. Steve Ballmer loves star power. I think that would make sense. And I know a lot of folks don't like the idea of trading him to the Milwaukee Bambies, but they have plenty of three-point shooters around if they want to spread it around with Giannis being an inside player and with Russell Westbrook not being a three-point player. And the Bambies, they got that nickname for me because they're soft. Russell Westbrook is not soft. And I don't think he would take that all that nonsense of them being early exits in the playoffs, especially with all the talent that he would have around him. More talent than they had at Houston, more than he had in Oklahoma City.
All right, let's hear that trade scenario.
All right, let's do it. And this actually comes from an ESPN podcast, The Low Post, with Zach Lowe of ESPN.com. And they talked about the possibility of the Pistons moving from the number 7 slot in the draft to the number 2 slot in the draft. It was Zach Lowe with Bill Simmons of The Ringer.
This is my favorite dumb trade I've made up in at least 2 years. Andrew Wiggins in the number 2 with Poole to make the contracts work to Detroit for Blake Griffin in number 7.
I didn't even make a Detroit fake trade with number 7.
So Detroit moves up 5 spots. They get out of Griffin because, you know, he's had 8 surgeries. But if you're Golden State, and I actually Googled Griffin to see how his knee progress was going. Apparently he's feeling great. His knees feels as good as it's been in some time. And his contract's up a year sooner than Wiggins. It's just more expensive. And that's kind of like the home run trade. Plus, you're only moving down 5 spots. So you're still getting somebody you really like at 7. You're just not getting one of the top 3 dudes. But the Blake Griffin, rolling the dice on, can you get 2 healthy years out of Blake? And if you do, what do you look like defensively and from a ball movement standpoint if you throw him into the mix now?
But then again, you're going all in on, well, you've gotten rid of Wiggins in that deal, so I take it back. As you see, you're going all in on closing games with like Draymond, Blake, Clay, Steph, and a wing or something, which is fine. I will say this. Enough people have asked me what I've heard about Blake Griffin and how he's looking. What am I hearing? This and that. That I think Detroit is going to have a market for him. I don't think it's going to be like strong. Like they're not getting 2 first-round picks or even a first-round pick unless they take back something onerous too. But I've had enough teams ask me about Blake Griffin that I think there's still interest in what he can do to help you win.
So very interesting discussion between Zach Lowe and Bill Simmons saying that there is going to be a market for Griffin and that they could potentially trade up to number 2 by giving away Griffin and the number 7 for Wiggins, Poole, and the number 2. What do you think about that possibility for Detroit?
Well, I like the idea of moving up and not having to give up a future number 1. And if Troy Weaver really loves LaMelo Ball, I mean, that's who we're assuming that they're going up to get. And, you know, if you move up to number 2 and you end up getting a superstar, I mean, that's the name of the game. And so do I think Detroit Weaver is thinking about something like, hey, which one of these guys in this draft is a superstar, and can I get one without giving up a future number one? Right there, it is. Like, I don't care about Jordan Poole coming back, but the thing about Wiggins is that, you know, there's still a chance if you can get him right that, you know, with his age and he could turn into something that, you know, I think could be an asset. And so if you're, I like that from a Pistons standpoint. I know he's got an extra year on that deal, but the one thing about the Pistons, it's not like they're going out and signing any free agents. So this kind of move here is something that I think Weaver, it might not be this exact move, but something like this where he can maneuver, he can take on some salary. The Pistons have a lot. We know that. They've got $30 million to spend, and if they can get up there, of course, you know, whoever he picks needs to be that superstar. But, you know, that's the kind of gamble you take when you're a GM here and, you know, you really feel good about it. You take your shot. I like that. I like that rather than just sitting back and being like, let's see who comes to us at 7 and let's see if we can, you know, make a run at Van Vliet. You know, I like that. I like this idea.
Yeah, I like it too. And I think that if the Minnesota Timberwolves, who have worked out LaMelo Ball, end up taking him, it would still make sense to go up and get Anthony Edwards, who is apparently by far the most athletic player in the draft and can create shots. A lot of folks are comparing him to James Harden in his ability to step back and create space to make shots. But, I mean, you think about the possibility of getting rid of the Blake Griffin contract, which is similar to Andrew Wiggins, except for the fact that Griffin is going to play less games, fewer games than Wiggins. And you look at your starting lineup on opening night, and it could be Christian Wood, a mystery forward, Wiggins, let's say Anthony Edwards, and Derrick Rose, or a starting lineup of Wood, a mystery forward, Wiggins, Luke Kennard, and Derrick Rose with LaMelo Ball coming off the bench. That's a lineup that I think is going to intrigue a lot of Pistons fans and would have some room for growth because Wood is still reasonably young. Wiggins is reasonably young. Kennard is in that same category. And then you've got either Edwards or Ball as one of your two backcourt mates. And, you know, Rose there for part of the season until they trade him away. I think that's a move I would do in a heartbeat.
Yeah, well, I love Anthony Edwards. I think he's going to be the best player in this draft. Go in and just watch the second half of the Maui Classic against Michigan State. You see
he tore him up.
And the kind of footwork that you're talking about, you know, that James Harden stuff. He reminded me a lot of Dwayne Wade watching him in that. But I mean, I haven't seen a guy post up people. He was posting up with his back to the basket on the 3-point line. And then, like, turning around, like, and shooting over guys for the – like, I had never seen anybody do that until I saw him doing it against Michigan State. He's incredible, like, everything that he does out there. I would love that. So if the Pistons, without, you know, mortgaging the future – and they're not. I mean, they're taking on some money, which they have in this scenario to get Wiggins. And if they got Anthony Edwards – and whoever they move up, like if like I know
it'd be Edwards or Ball if they're going number 2, right?
Well, yeah, or I guess Wiseman. Like if you know you think he's the going to be the superstar of the bunch, I would think it's going to be one of those 3.
Yeah.
You know, you're right. Like people have been talking. The thing about Ball, he might be that, but you know, he's also the highest risk, I think, out of everybody.
Well, the experts are saying the opposite. Just yesterday, ESPN had a mock draft special. Who went number 1 overall? LaMelo Ball. What kind of feedback are we getting?
Yeah, well, hopefully people saying that they don't trust those ESPN experts. Let's see. Keith, who is a big NBA fan, let's put on these glasses. What happens when you get 50? Turn 50. Keith, the number 2 pick in Andrew Wiggins. I like that deal a lot. No way Westbrook would want to come here without Blake. Let's see. The Pistons would still be a bad team with Westbrook and no Blake, even with Wood. Not much else on that roster. They might not even make the playoffs with that roster. I mentioned to you guys on Tuesday about interest in Blake in a trade. I'd like to see Wiggins and Edwards come to the Pistons. Paul wants us to talk about some college hockey. What's up?
Again.
You know what, Paul, I'll be DVRing Michigan and Arizona State this weekend. So coming back next Tuesday, man. I guess you and I just have to get each other's numbers and talk some hockey.
There you go. That makes sense. All right, let's turn the page to the third chapter. And that takes us to ESPN's newest power rankings. Like many sports websites, they put out a power rankings list every single week. And when it comes to the same old Lions, they have them sitting at number 25. That's an appropriate SOL ranking for the Honolulu Blue and Silver. They're no good. They've lost back-to-back games. They have a losing record, so halfway through the season, putting them at 25 makes sense. Now, this week for their little blurb after their ranking, which is what a lot of these organizations do, they decided to go with the recalibrated expectations for each team. What should the expectations be for the second half of the season? So when it comes to your Detroit Lions, let's scroll down and see what they have. And by the way, when it comes to this expectations, it ranges obviously from each team. Like, for example, the Rams at number 11, their expectation was to return to the playoffs. For the Vikings at number 19, theirs was to get the 7 seed. As for the same old Lions at 25, as you can see, their recalibrated expectation is getting to 500. So obviously that means a 5-3 finish. But it says this feels like a best case scenario for the Lions after a 3-5 start to the season, where the Lions have often struggled against the run, with Matt Patricia firmly on the hot seat and his boss Bob Quinn potentially there as well. The Lions need to show massive improvement from the first half of the year, where Detroit has continued to make mistakes, blah, blah, blah. But they're saying that the best case scenario for the Lions is a 5-3 finish to get to 500. Do you agree, Dennis, that finishing 500 is the best case scenario, especially if you take out the best case scenario is tanking to get rid of Quinn and Patricia?
Well, like, there are some, like, I think they could beat the Washington football team. I think they could beat Carolina. I think they could beat the Texans. There's 3. I don't really feel like, do I think they could get the Bears? I don't know. I don't see they're going to win 5 games there.
Mm-hmm. They got Green Bay, Tennessee, Tampa, and Minnesota after that.
Yeah, I don't see that.
What do you think their best case scenario is then?
Well, like I said, I think they could beat the Washington football team, the Panthers and Texans. I think that they could. I think they'll probably win one of those. I only think they're winning. I only think they'll win 3 more games. They'll be lucky to win 3.
6-10.
Yeah, 6-10. But I would. That's where I'd put my money. But I could easily see them going with just 2 wins there too.
Yeah, look, I've said 5-11 for the entirety of the season. Before each week, after each week, when they were 0-2, when they got to 3-3, I was always saying 5-11, and I still believe that they're going to be 5-11. But in terms of my recalibrated expectation, I think their best case scenario would be to go 4-4 the rest of the year to get to 7-9. I don't think that's going to happen, but I think that's the best case, because if you look at their next 4, they've got Washington, FT, Carolina, Houston, and at Chicago. Perhaps they could win 3 of those games. It'd be really ugly, especially with Galladay likely out for this Sunday. TJ Hawkinson didn't practice today with a toe injury. It looks like he's not going to play against Washington FT, so that's looking like a loss. But if somehow they beat them, and then it looks like McCaffrey might not play at Carolina next week, perhaps they beat them. And then Houston's, they've had a troublesome time, and Chicago's offense has really started to catch up with them. If they could split those 2, then all of a sudden you're at 3 wins, and then the final 4 games, they're going to be underdogs, pull off 1 upset. That'd be the sloppy way of looking at finishing with a 4-4 stretch. You win 3 out of the next 4, which would be very fortunate to do so, and then just pull off 1 upset in the final quarter of the season. I don't think it's going to happen, though.
I don't either. And that's not saving. Are we thinking that's going to save somebody's job? If they're able to go with the recalibrated expectations. They might have 8 teams in the playoffs. So you can make a case that they were in playoff contention. Will you buy that?
Well, I wouldn't, but Sheila Ford Hamp might, because right now they're sitting at 3-5, and they're the 10 or 11 seed. It's really difficult to get in, even with 8 teams making the playoffs. And I think that scenario coming out where they're going to have to add more teams because the coronavirus is going to is going to cancel some games, that's looking a heck of a lot more likely when you look at how the virus is spreading. But even with that, the Lions aren't getting in with an 8-8 record. Now, if they finish 7-9, they're not going to get in with 8 teams, is what I meant. But if they finish 7-9 and they tank by losing their final 3 or 4 games of the season, would that be enough for Sheila Ford-Hamp to say, hey, they were like playoff contender-ish, so I'll bring it back? I think it might.
Yeah, you know what? If they just have 10 men on the field, I think if Sheila this weekend, and if Sheila Ford-Hamp doesn't fire everybody at that point, you're going to have an indication that this really is the same old Lions. Paul asking the question next year: who would your guys' new Lions coach and GM be? What is your view? I've got a view on that. I think as far as the GM, that's going to be the most important thing. And you just look across the NFL. This is not that difficult. People are always like, they got to throw themselves at the mercy of the league or whatever else. And I don't think they need to do that. I think you just look at the best organizations and who's drafted the best over the last couple of years. No, they're not going to go to the Patriots, but you can go to the Ravens. I think the Ravens, the Steelers, you start taking a look there in the AFC and the NFC. Now, Seattle they haven't done such a great job drafting on defense the last couple of years, but I think that's an organization you definitely look at. I think the 49ers and what's been going on there. Those are a couple there. That's where the general manager should come from. And then, as far as a head coach, you're looking through the coordinators. I don't know, like somebody was asking me, would I root for Jim Harbaugh if he went to the Lions, if the next general manager picked him to be the head coach of the Lions? And I root for John Harbaugh. I root for Jim Harbaugh.
Mm-hmm. That'd be fascinating to see him go up 94 from Ann Arbor to Detroit. He wouldn't have to move, but that'd be interesting to see if that happened. 2 guys I'm thinking about are I forget his first name, but his last name is Brady. He was the offensive coordinator. Brady. Yeah, Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator for LSU last year. He's now, I think, the OC for the Panthers. And then another guy is getting a lot of buzz. Actually, two other guys. Eric Bieniemy, obviously, from Kansas City. And then the other guy who's getting some buzz is the offensive coordinator for Clemson. I mean, talk about a guy who... I think that's his name. He's been coaching a lot of star players, not just Trevor Lawrence, but Deshaun Watson at the quarterback position. He's been coaching star wide receivers for years, running backs. He's been putting together imaginative offenses, coaching these guys up. I think it'd be a big jump, not just from coordinator to head coach, but college coordinator to NFL head coach. But I would take that risk.
Yeah, I think Elliott or Brady, you could see both of those guys, going to Jacksonville and the New York Jets respectively, along with the 2 top quarterbacks that are going to be drafted. So I could definitely see that happening. And then, like we talked about last week, there's Trask from Florida. There seems to be a difference of opinion on whether he's a first rounder or not. Zach Wilson from BYU is another one to keep an eye on. And so those are the kind of guys that you're thinking about picking from. I did see that Trey Lance moved. You might get a shot at Trey Lance or Zach Wilson. So when BYU's on all these Friday games, maybe take a look at that. Maybe that'd be something that, could be your future Lions QB.
Yeah, and when the Lions make their choice for the next general manager and head coach, I'm going to assume it's going to fail. Because until proven otherwise, whoever the Lions bring in as head coach, whoever they bring in as general manager, is a failure. I know lots of folks out there like to say, well, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. No, you've got to earn the benefit of the doubt by doing something worthy of the benefit of the doubt. And that doesn't mean 9-7 in the first year. That doesn't mean 10-6 with a playoff loss. Win some playoff games and show that you're different than everybody else.
Yeah, and while I'm not as big of a sourpuss as you, I agree. This organization doesn't deserve the benefit of the doubt until they win a playoff game. Dason says they should already be fired for passing on to Tua. I thought that I'm sure Keith has put that in here too on YouTube. I'll have to check.
Well, and I'm still standing by what I've been saying all along. Drafting Tua would have been the wrong pick because I don't trust his hip. And if a couple years from now he busts his hip again and then he's done for his career, you're not going to like that pick. Now, that doesn't mean that Jeff Okuda's looking like the right pick. I would have taken Derek Brown, who actually hasn't had that good of a start to his career in Carolina, and I was very okay with Jeff Okudah. It just seems like he forgot to play football because the Lions have a way of doing that to players.
Hips don't lie. We only have 3 minutes left in this show. I got to go, at least unless you want to continue on.
No, let's turn the page to the fourth chapter.
Let's get to the fourth chapter, and that gets us to the Tigers, who are potentially interested in making a move for Taijuan Walker, a 28-year-old free
Taiwan.
agent. What did I say?
Taiwan. It's Taiwan, like the country.
I thought I called
Taiwan.
it. Oh, Taiwan. All right.
Yeah.
Well, they want him. At least they're linked to him. What do you think?
Look, he made 8 starts in 2018 and 19 combined due to Tommy John surgery, so that's kind of a red flag. But last year with the Blue Jays and Mariners, he pitched over 53 innings at a 2.70 ERA, a 1.16 WHIP. They're talking about a 1-year or a 2-year deal. If I'm the Tigers, I would definitely go after Walker. He's been a solid major leaguer throughout his career. He was great down the stretch last year with the Blue Jays. And the Tigers need so much help with their starting pitching. They need it in the worst way. That was the worst part of their team. I mean, they were babying starting pitchers into 3 and 5 inning starts, and they still couldn't get them through. Didn't matter whether it was Fulmer or it was Boyd or it was the guys they brought up as young prospects in Mize and Skubal. They all stunk last year. They're all going to be coming back with the exception of Zimmerman and Nova. So Hinch needs some help. So, yes, get them Walker. And there's no guarantee, based on what we saw last year, that Mize and Skubal are going to be any good.
Well, you have a funny way of pronouncing Springer and LeMahieu. But you know what? Walker did have a good bounce-back year after the injuries the previous years there, 2.70 ERA. And when you just get that 1 year, it feels like Ivan Nova, Matt Moore, Tyson Ross, Francisco Liriano. But this is somebody who is just 28 years old and is coming off a good year or a good season. So if you're only signing him for a year and he decides to come here, that does seem like a good move, because you're right. Even though you take a look at the starters here for the Tigers, it could go Mize, Boyd, Fulmer, Skubal, and then Walker here. And you got Manning and Wentz and Faedo and Perez, but you can't count on all those guys. If we learned anything this last year, you might be
6 ERA pitchers. I mean, Walker would step in and be the ace.
Yep. All right, I've got 1 minute to go, so we better get to the fifth chapter.
All right. And that takes us to the major wager. What are you looking at?
I'm going to double down on my pick with the Eagles getting 13.5 against the Irish. I bet 100 on Tuesday. I want to put another 100 on it. I'm up to 200. Wow. That's how strong I feel about BC. Maybe, you know what? I'm going to put 100 on the money line, whatever it is, and then I'll take the 13.5 on the other side. How about that?
All right, well, Wisconsin's a 4.5-point road favorite against Michigan. They clearly looked like the second-best team a couple of weeks ago, but they haven't played. And one thing about this game is while Graham Mertz is questionable, everybody that tested positive after him is not going to be eligible to play because of the 21-day window. I think because of rust and because of lack of players, Michigan is going to win this game outright. Take Michigan to win plus 170.
Go blue. All right, how about that, chap? Taking Michigan to win. All right, that's going to do it for the fifth chapter. We will talk with you. We'll get into some college hockey. I'm just kidding. Paul and I will on Tuesday. Have a great weekend. For Brian Chapman, Dennis Fithian, fifth chapter. Thanks for watching.
He represents the mitten by way of Penn State. When Chapman gets to talking sports, the people can't wait. He represents the mitten. Be a true EMU, but cut Dennis in the fall, and his veins bleeding blue. They got respect around the state. When that light turns red, so don't sleep on these dudes. Just invite your friends to cut your nap short and tip your cap for and sit back for the fifth chapter. Brian Chapman, Dennis Fithian. When they open their mouths, they spit in the facts, bro. This ain't even optional, man. You just have to tune into YouTube to watch the broadcast or download it to your phone to peep the podcast. They mix laughter, they get after. It's all captured in the fifth chapter.